So Jolene, if you're there, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jolene Ardiolo, and I am presently the chairman of Seabrook Island Birders. And I want to mention first, before we get into the program, that we have one more upcoming activity for November. And it's Friday, November 26th, which is the day after Thanksgiving. So this can be called the Alt Black Friday activity, or the Green Friday activity, or the Walking Off the Bird activity. But it will be a walk on at Camp St. Christopher, and it is going to be from 8 a.m. until 11 a.m. So if you want to participate in Black Friday shopping, you would still have plenty of time during the day if you wanted to sign up for that. And then the only other one I want to mention is December the 6th, Learning Together on Crooked Oaks Golf Course. The golf course activities are usually pretty popular, so you might want to go ahead and register for that. But all our activities for the next couple months, you can find them on SeabrookIslandBirders.org. And that will show you all the activities and the upcoming programs and the Zoom movies. And also it's just a lot of information on our website. So moving on, I want to introduce Ed and Aija. Konrad, they are our, and I wasn't sure how to phrase this, they're either our power birding couple or our birding power couple. I couldn't decide which moniker to put on them, so you can pick whichever one you like. But for the 1% of you that may not know them, if you have not read their bio with the program information, you should go back and read that, because I was going to mention a few things, and then I read that and thought, well, this is very succinct and a good indication of what they do. So if you haven't read that, you should go back and read it. But I just wanted to mention that even though they're talking about their top 10 birding moments, if you have had any opportunity to bird with Ed and Aija, you will realize that every day is a birding moment for them. So when they go birding with us on Seabrook, they get just as excited about the birds that I get excited about, which may be the yellow-bellied sapsucker on the tree, as they would one of their other birds when they've gone on their extended trips. So they are birders that go out of the country and all over the country, but they also take advantage of where they are. And I just have to tell one story. Last year, and some of you may already know this, so I sit on my back porch a lot and watch the birds out in my backyard. That's my range of birding. And so I watch Aija and Ed go off on these extended trips. But she was so excited about after their Christmas tree, after they had finished with their Christmas tree last year, she puts it on her back porch, on her back deck, and fills it up with suet, and seems really upset when they finally have to get rid of it, in May. So she's just as happy watching her backyard birds as she is going on this trip, I think. But that's really all I have to say, but I'm just going to turn it over to Ed and Aija. And thank you so much for doing this for us tonight. We know how much work you put into it.
Great. Thanks, Jolene, for that nice introduction, and welcome to all of you Seabrook Island members, guests. We have some family here and some good friends as well. Just give me a minute to fire up our screen show here. So our topic is Aija and Ed's top 10 birding moments around the world. And there's a lot of photos in this story. So you can minimize the people on the upper right-hand corner. I'm looking at 4 now. You can minimize it with the little buttons on the top and just go to 1. I'm looking at Jolene now, the single screen, and you can even move that box into the far right-hand corner, okay? Top 10 birding moments around the world. That's a topic for tonight. Many of our programs, we've done 9 Zoom programs since we kicked this format off last June. And of course, we're a birding club. They're all about learning about the birds, and they're about protecting the birds. This topic is about bird and some of our favorite moments. Aija, you want to give us a perspective on the moments?
So when we thought of our topic and we told the Bird Club what we were going to do, I began to realize how ridiculously hard it was going to be to narrow 12 years of birding down to 10 moments. So it certainly wasn't going to be 10 birds. And so I began to think about bird watching moments. A lot of our programs are about the birds, but I thought about specific things on bird watching, sights and sounds and hikes and the time of the day, even smells, and maybe even a memory of the best peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which you all know we eat for lunch when we bird, or the best glass of wine at the end of a day. And we came up with 10 moments. Maybe some of them are a little packed full of moments within moments, but that's what we
we agreed pretty quickly, didn't we, on those top 10 moments? We got right to it, right?
not a chance, not a chance.
So it took us 4 weeks to agree on the moments, and then we had 4 days to put the presentation together. So a little bit of the big picture. Go ahead.
Let me just remind you that every picture you see on this collage and every picture you see in our slideshow tonight, Ed took every single picture. It's so great to have my own personal photographer along, and we took no organized bird tours. This is all a do-it-yourself operation. All we did was hire some day guides in different places around the world.
So there's a lot of moments on this collage. Let's talk a little bit about the opportunities for moments. Lots of moments across the United States with our birding.
So this is an eBird, our eBird app, and birders use this phone app to track their sightings all over the world. And so you can track your own sightings, keep your own numbers, and you can also check places that you're going to go visit. So in our big year, for instance, we birded all 48 lower 48 states when we did our big year. We've birded every county in South Carolina. The darker colors show where you have the most birds, like which states, South Carolina and Georgia. And we've birded 152 of 159 counties in Georgia. Georgia has a ridiculous amount of counties. So we've been really working at our birding.
So just a word on bird watching. If you read Aija's nice articles in the Seabrook that she writes almost every month, she wrote an article about 2 months ago on the tranquility and how peaceful birding is. Well, there's another side to birding, and that's a combat side of birding, type A personality type. So it takes most people 6 hours to get from Atlanta to Charleston. It takes us usually about 12 hours because we're picking off all these counties in rural Georgia or South Carolina. So lots of moments in the US to choose from. From a worldwide point of view, we, like many of you, have been fortunate to travel lots of places around the world. The blue dots are places where the two of us just took vacations, or where I was fortunate to go to with some of the work I did in my second career. The red dots are where Aija and I birded together. So lots of moments. How do you choose 10? 1,023 life birds, over 4,500 checklists, and that just started in 2015 or so. Here's an interesting statistic. I wondered later this afternoon, how many photos do I have of birds? And it's not hard to find out. I went into my files. I have 16,000 edited photographs of birds. So I asked Aija how many she thought 1,000. So how did we choose these moments? Actually, we agreed on them pretty well. I was kidding before, because we've shared all these moments together around the world, and they were all pretty well embedded in my mind. So Any perspective on just the priority before we get into the top 10 moments? Is the priority? They're not necessarily.
Oh, no, these are not necessarily in any order. That was too hard. So we're just going to do 10 great moments.
So we thought about asking David Letterman to come and join us to take us through the top 10 events, top 10 moments, like he did so well for years. But, you know, he's retired and we probably couldn't afford him. So you're going to have to put up with I and I. We're not nearly as funny as David Letterman.
His son is a very avid birder.
I did not know that. How about that? So, memorable birding moments, top 10. Number 10 is a birding pal in Thailand.
A birding pal in a very far away place. We often try to some of the faraway places we've been to have been because of Ed's business trips, and I often try to join him. And this was, I would say, an arduous journey. I flew alone from Atlanta to Bangkok, but I went via Tokyo, and the plane had a mechanical. I had to spend the night alone in Tokyo because the plane couldn't go, and it took almost the whole next day to get to Thailand, and we almost lost out on our birding trip, but we made it, and we had this wonderful guide that you see, and that hands on the hip pose, I don't know, that was just coincidental, but she was absolutely wonderful. She picked us up at our hotel at dawn, and we birded until dark.
And some of the birds you saw.
Oh, Thailand has lots of marshes and wetlands, just like the low country in South Carolina. And it's almost overwhelming at first when you are in a new country, and every single bird we saw was new in Thailand. So I had studied my guidebooks, but honestly, I felt overwhelmed. But there's a stilt. We have a black-necked stilt in South Carolina. There was a black-winged stilt. A cattle egret was always around cows. And herons and bitterns and egrets were everywhere.
Those Asian open bills, kind of like our wood storks, and with the guide, some Thailand specific birds.
Yes, there were lots of jacanas, which are wetland birds, pheasant-tailed jacana. And our guide got the most excited about that little plain bird on the right there called the long-toed stint. That apparently was fairly rare for the area and was very exciting for her to show to us.
I always love it when a bird's behavior mimics its name. So that pied fantail was behaving like its name. Now we had a full day of birding with our birding pal. We did have a chance to see some of the sights of Thailand along the way. I was a little freaked out. My wife was somewhere lost in transition in Japan, but she got there okay. We saw this temple throughout our journeys in Bangkok, and over a glass of wine as the sun came down in a rooftop bar, we saw it again. And here was a memorable photographic moment. This is the Wat Arun Temple in Bangkok. Now, those of you that know me, I've got a fair amount of photography gear that I lug around. I took this picture with my smartphone at the time, so I was pretty pleased with how that turned out. So let's head back to the US for birding moment number 2, number 9, Dawn on the Prairie.
So during our big year in 2018, one of the birds we really wanted to see was the greater prairie chicken. And this bird has lost tremendous amounts of numbers due to loss of habitat. So we went to, early April, to a private ranch in Burwell, Nebraska. Calamus Outfitters was the name of the ranch, 20,000 acres. And we were going specifically to look for the greater prairie chicken on a lek. And you may say, well, what the heck is a lek? A lek is where male birds display for competitively to compete for females. So we were going here, and how about this for a fun day? We got up at 4:30 in the morning. We had to be downstairs at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was pitch dark. People were groggy, drinking their coffee, and we piled into vans to go out to the prairie. Who knows where? It was a bumpy ride. And we were told before we went, we knew this the day before already, that we would have no bathroom facilities, and we would not be allowed to talk. So we had to be very, very quiet. We got out of the vans on the prairie and got into gutted school buses. And there you can see me sitting in the school bus and folding chairs out on the prairie. And it was still dark. Everyone is totally silent, and we began to wait for the birds.
So the sun begins to come up, and we start to see them up here. This is the lek, and the males are forming. There's just a few females, And all of a sudden, as the light comes up, we start to see the males pairing off, posturing. They're right about here, was able to get some good shots with my long lens. Then I love this, what we call them was rabbit ears, didn't we?
Yeah, we didn't know what, that's all feathers.
Right, and then of course, there was a good bit of fighting as they competed for the females. So these 2 hours in the dark, in the cold, without saying a word other than gasping once in a while, was truly a memorable moment for us.
And those are orange sacs that the birds have that aren't visible when they're not on the lek, and they inflate those to attract the female. And the displays, the jumping is really quite acrobatic.
So, Prairie Chickens at dawn. Memorable moment number 8, I'm sorry, keep track of the numbers, Ed. Parrots of the Sea.
So parrots of the sea are puffins, and who doesn't love a puffin? This bird is just a silly little bird that is so fun to see. There are 3 species of puffins in the US, the horned puffin, the tufted puffin, and the Atlantic puffin. And the horned puffin, the tufted puffin we saw first in Alaska. And this was at Kenai Fords National Park. We were on a boat trip out of Seward, and we just saw these wonderful birds bobbing in the ocean.
And our second sighting of the tufted puffin was on our Lewis and Clark trip. We actually went to the Pacific Ocean to a spot that Lewis and Clark had viewed the Pacific when they got to Oregon. Didn't know that that rock, Haystack Rock, was filled with puffins. So you can see how far away we were trying to see these puffins. We could see them in Aja's spotting scope. Not a bad photo. Better photo is actually this one.
The wooden puffin.
The wooden puffin. And the third encounter was with another puffin species.
And that was this summer off the coast of Maine, and they were spectacular. This is the Atlantic puffin. It was a life bird for us, and they have been very successfully reestablished off the coast of Maine, a nesting colony in Little Egg Island, and also at Petite Manan National Wildlife Refuge. And they just made you laugh. One looks like it's standing in the ocean. I don't know what it's getting ready to do. And I also learned that puffins can live up to 30 years.
So this is also a memorable photography moment. This is a tough bird to get a shot of as the boat is bobbing up and down and the puffins are bobbing up and down, but I was quite pleased with the way these little guys turned out. So back to our top 10 birding moments. Number 7, the path between the seas. And to see the path between the seas, of course, you've got to go to Panama. And before we got to the path, we spent some time in the Gamboa Rainforest Resort.
And this was a wonderful eco lodge and that we stayed at. We hired several day guides to take us out for trips on our first trip. And
oh yeah, we did breakfast. So the guide is taking us out on our first trip. He's describing what birds we might see, and he stopped in his tracks, looked up on a limb, and there was this slaty-tailed trogon with a giant bug in his mouth. I thought, I'm done for the day. That's about as good of a photo as I'm going to get. But then there was more. There was a violaceous, did I say that right? Trogon and more, Aija?
when we would walk from our room to breakfast and to the hotel restaurant, we would see toucans in the trees and araucaries. It was just amazing to just walk along the walkways of the hotel and see these birds right by us.
Here's a couple
One of our first trips out of the country.
Here's a couple of favorites. We'll talk more about woodpeckers later, but the cinnamon woodpecker, particularly stunning. We love to see kites in the kite fields of South Carolina when we head to Seabrook Island. This was a very unusual and a new kite for us, a double tooth kite. And just look how that bird is camouflaged perfectly in the leaves. Difficult one to see. This is a moment about with another guide.
And this was Domi. He was a great guide. We did one of those dusk to dawn, dawn to dusk birding days. And he took us all over and also past the Panama Canal. And we were looking for a particular bird, particularly called a manakin. And
so a manakin is on a lek also. And this was the time of year when they were breeding. And they make a very interesting sound, don't they, Aya, on the lick?
Yes, it's
the
like a
nail?
snap, crackle.
Like
boom.
a snap, crackle, pop. So the guide was listening for that. He heard it. He and I ran into the jungle. Aya's getting pretty freaked out that I'm now trancing through the jungle of Panama. And all of a sudden he said, there it is. And I got a split second to get a shot of the golden collared mannequin.
Yes.
Mannequin. And I was very pleased with that photograph. Yes, there's a piece of grass in front of it, but I had a nanosecond to catch that shot. So we got our target bird in another terrific moment in Panama. The moment, though, was the path between the seas. So we headed to Panama City. I had some work that I was doing somewhere here, and I was up on this hill doing some birding. Great picture, Aya, by the way, of the skyline of Panama City. We had a few days of leisure time in Panama City, and we were going to see the canal. I was reading David McCullough's book, The Path Between the Seas, which was just a fascinating encounter with Teddy Roosevelt's vision and how the canal was built, and wonderful to know that history as we toured the canal.
Yes, and it was a thrill just to see the birds soaring up ahead. There were magnificent frigate birds everywhere, and just our usual herons and egrets and brown pelicans were flying around the canal, and it was just a thrill to go through the locks with big ships, little ships, and we did a half-day transit on the canal, which was really spectacular.
So we can say, been there, done that, done the Panama Canal transit, which was quite a thrill. And when we were in this spot, we were doing some birding on the north end of the canal. We saw lots of cool birds like we've talked about, but we also saw this guy, a sloth. That sloth that I'd never seen out of a zoo before was moving at about the pace that it's moving in that picture. So there's a transition here, because on our trips and our moments aren't always about just the birds. So memorable birding moment number 6 is it's not always about the birds. In our travels, out west especially, always moose, really formidable animal when they come racing across the highway because they weigh 1,000 pounds or more. This one was in Rocky Mountain National Park, taking a little bath, thank goodness. Buffaloes are always terrific to see. This one was at the Devil's Tower National Monument in Wyoming. What was the name of that Richard Dreyfuss movie?
Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind was what Richard had in mind in that particular movie. This was a drive in South Dakota on Needles Highway, appropriately.
So we're driving on Needles Highway, and we still had a few hours left of daylight, and we came to a man-made, a natural tunnel that was cut through natural stone, and the 3 cars up ahead of us are stopped dead, and there's no cars coming through the tunnel. So we couldn't figure out, well, what's the problem? And we got out of the car, and there in the tunnel was a family of mountain goats, and they were licking salt off the side. And we lost all our daylight that day. We had to wait for over an hour till no one could get them out. They were just there, and we had to all wait patiently. And that's an encounter that was funny.
It was pitch dark. The guy in the first car had his headlights on, so that's how we were able to get that photograph. Another interesting moment was doing our pelagic trip in Monterey, California. It was about the whales.
And that was a really tough day. If any of you remember from the big year, we had a gorgeous day, and the seas were so rough that it was the longest 7 or 8 hours I've ever spent on a boat. And it was really difficult. But we're treated at the end to see these whales. Those are actually whale watching boats, and they're actually way too close. Our picture was taken way back from our pelagic trip. And for those of you who don't know what a pelagic trip is, it's a trip where you go bird watching on the ocean and view birds that actually live over the ocean except to nest. And that was a thrill.
So sometimes it's not about the birds, it's about the weather. Oops, no, we're still on the animals, I'm sorry. It's a thrill to see a bobcat at Seabrook or Kiowa. They're so rare. We don't see them that much out west, but we came across this one at Pinnacles National Park in California.
We were looking for the California condor, and before we started up the mountain to look for the birds, we were birding at the campground, And I looked over and I saw this cat sitting on a stump and I said, oh, Ed, I said, who would bring their cat camping? And all of a sudden we both looked at each other and laughed and said, oh, that's a special kind of cat there. And he just sat there and eyeballed us the whole time.
We went back that night and kept looking at the photo and saying, no, that's a Maine Coon cat. That couldn't be a bobcat that just sat on that stump. But we had another encounter, this time in Portal, Arizona. This beautiful bobcat came rushing out of the bush while we were peacefully looking at some hummingbirds on feeders, and got a great shot of that guy. And always a question when I'm out there about, have you seen the bears? Like in South Carolina, people see my big lens and say, where are the gators? Same way when we're out west, where are the grizzlies? That top grizzly was a memorable moment in Denali National Park in September with the fall blueberry colors. Now we weren't that close, and we were in a bus, but we were kind of close. A young grizzly in Yellowstone where the traffic stops and everybody gets out of the car to see it. And what about this black bear in New Hampshire?
Oh, we were on Dixville Peak in New Hampshire looking for a boreal chickadee, and lo and behold, they're in the bushes, also from the car, thankfully, was a black bear. I have a fear of bears. When you're out west and you see signs everywhere, beware of bears, and you think that bear could run mighty fast.
We kind of talked about what we might do. I don't know. Would I throw my camera at it? I'm not sure what I would do in an encounter like that. And a little bit more, if it's not always about the birds, sometimes it's a sunset.
And this was a beautiful sunset at Island Beach State Park in New Jersey. We were looking for a snowy owl during my big year. It was December 30th, and we spent about 4 to 5 hours walking up and down the beach looking for this owl in the sand dunes. And finally,
there it was.
almost dark.
I had my ISO cranked up pretty high, meaning it was dark when I took it. So that's a moment. Was it about the sunset or was it about the owl? And it was a bit of both. Now, how about these very desolate looking plains, Aija?
Yes, you may say, ooh, that's not very exciting birding there, but actually that's Pawnee National Grasslands in Colorado. And I love birding grasslands. There's just so many unique, difficult to find birds, but it was wonderful. We were driving, and it just goes on for like 20 miles. And we were looking for burrowing owls that nest in prairie dog holes in the ground.
And there it was, not in the hole, but sitting up on a post for us. So was it about the beauty of the grasslands? Was it about the burrowing owl? A bit of both. It's also about majestic scenery. This was our first trip to Utah. We did some of the national parks. This is Arches National Park, and we were at the perfect time of day, that perfect light in the late afternoon, early evening, and there's my bird watcher framed with the arches in this shot. This is fun. In our travels through the Georgia counties, we'll be looking for birds, and all of a sudden we'll see an old barn or an old house or an old country store with a Coca-Cola sign, and we'll stop, do a quick U-turn, and go back and take some photos. I think our family members that are with us tonight will recognize a couple of those as they're on the wall of our home. Here's the weather.
Weather can be an interesting factor in birding. Sometimes you have a day tightly planned and you have a giant thunderstorm in the afternoon that just won't quit. And here was such a case in Montana. And finally, we were able to get out of the car, and the hot spot was called Kmart Wetlands. We were looking for some grebes, and sure enough, we had the most gorgeous rainbow. And the other picture with the snow is actually Rocky Mountain National Park on May 31st. This was Memorial Day at the top of the park, and you can see how much snow there was. We were in some snow squalls that day also, which was really funny. And you never know what you're going to get with that weather.
And here's, I think, the favorite moment, not about the birds. This is in Denali National Park. We've been there twice in Alaska. And we're part of the 30% club, meaning people that visit Denali National Park, only 30% of those people actually get to see Mount Denali. That looming mountain in the background is 20,000 feet high, the tallest mountain in North America, I believe. And in the top picture, believe it or not, we are still 80 miles away from that mountain. So those were two memorable moments being part of the 30% club. Now, I guess it's time to get back to the birds. So let's make a transition back to the birds. And number 5, challenging hunts.
Woodpeckers. Ed loves to photograph woodpeckers. They are just colorful and they're usually doing something. The acorn woodpeckers are so silly looking. So we have in South Carolina and Georgia, the 8 first woodpeckers, the top row and the 2 in the second row. And most of the other ones are found west of the Mississippi. And so we've seen, I think, 20 out of 21 woodpecker species in the US. And
good. And the ones here, we often see in our backyard every day. Some are a little more difficult, like the pileated. You got to go to special places to see the red cockaded, Donnelly, WMA, etc. Some of these Western birds are really hard to find. So it is about the challenging hunt. So let's talk about challenging hunts of those last 3. This one, the Lewis's woodpecker, was a target bird on Aja's big year in 2018. Aja's eBird took us to a neighborhood where the bird should be seen. Sure enough, there it was, sitting on top of that perch. Flew right away. We followed it, landed way over here in the crock of this tree. And actually, I was fortunate to lock onto that bird and was able, with some cropping, a whole lot of editing, to get a really good picture. A stunning bird with that rose-colored breast and green body. So really a fun hunt. The next challenging hunt was in California.
so we had, this was at the end of our Lewis and Clark trip on like day 28, and we were ready to the next morning to head back to Georgia, 3,000 miles. We had a long drive ahead of us, and we had tried for the white-headed woodpecker the day before, and we hadn't gotten it. And I said to Ed, how about we get up at sunrise and be at this campground on the top of some little mountain and give me 30 minutes. I set my phone timer and I said, okay, and then we can leave after that. And at minute 28, Ed spotted the bird.
There it was. It was way, way back here in the woods. And I really love it. Aja has 1,000 some odd life birds across the world. Not many of those that I've seen, but it's a real thrill for me to spot a life bird. And we locked on it, we watched it fly through the woods, and sometimes this happens. This beautiful bird decided to pose for us right on top of that pine cone. So a very memorable moment. And the third challenging hunt was just this year.
The last woodpecker that we needed was the black-backed woodpecker, and we were in New Hampshire. And you can see me there. The black flies were terrible, and I have netting on my head, and we had a really, really long hike along this railroad bed and through the woods. Luckily, we ran into a local birder, and he helped us. He knew the sound of it. He knew where they hung out, and we just stayed with him, and lo and behold,
boom, there it was. Now, he heard
deep
it,
in the
and
woods.
I think the 3 of us saw it at the same time. We saw the movement way between the trees, and I wanted to get a good look at this bird. I wanted to get a good photo, but that was the best we could do. But we watched it fly, and again, we were fortunate. We tracked it, and it came close enough to get a good shot. So that's the black-headed woodpecker.
Black-backed woodpecker.
Backed woodpecker.
Yes, and it was very busy shredding that bark, looking for beetles, and it was just, bark was flying everywhere. And it was so exciting to finally find it.
Challenging. Movement number 4 is going solo. So this one's on me. As Jolene introduced us, and I think many of you know this, this is our hobby. This is what we do. We've been birding and shooting photos together since 2009, I believe, when we started. A couple of times, though, I've been alone on business trips, and if I was going to be there for an extended period of time, I'd take my gear with me. So this is going solo in Singapore. Some of you may have traveled to this interesting city. I did some sightseeing. Aja has been there with me once before. Some of the sights, it's the famous Merlion fountain with the head of a lion in the body of a fish. This is a casino. It's a sands casino. It looks like a boat. And I was way up here, not gambling, taking photos of Singapore. I did hire a birding pal when I was there, like Aija did in Thailand, and got stunning looks at these sunbirds on these stunning flowers. I just didn't expect that. Here's 3 different species. Kingfishers. We have one kingfisher, a little belted guy, fun to see and photograph. These are bigger birds, big beaks, very, very colorful. There's 3. I saw even more while I was there. The guide had a target bird he wanted me to see, take a photo of. We hunted for it in the parks. Towards the end of the day, he heard its very unusual sound. We looked and looked and looked. This is a thrush. So it was skulking around, and all of a sudden, boom, showed up. Memorable moment, a white crested laughing thrush, and just sat up and posed for me. Another quick moment solo was in this interesting place, Dubai. I had always wanted to go to Dubai. It's a place like no other. This is one of the trips that we look back and wish that I had come with me. I've been there a few times. I was there for an extended period once, and so I did some sightseeing. This is the Burj, the world's tallest building at 2,727 feet. This is from the top of the Burj, looking down at the city of Dubai. Interesting, it's not like you're on a tall building in New York City, looking as far as you can see at a city. Dubai is an area of these smaller metropolises. This is the finance center. I was bold on this trip and went on my own birding. I hired a car, rented a car, did some birding in the sod farms, saw this lapwing, saw this very beautiful white-tailed plover. Looked around the parks. You can see the Burj is looming on the skyline here. I was spotted this beautiful Indian roller, and gosh, can you imagine in a park you see a bird that looks like this? Just an Eurasian hoopoe. Hoopoe. I have trouble with that name. Thank you, Aija. Just there in the park, a stunning bird. Now I had a target bird, so I got really bold, and I ventured out to the Ras Al Khor Wildlife Sanctuary, a ways out of Dubai. Didn't plan very well because it was closed when I got there, all alone in the middle of nowhere. But I was able to look through the fence and get some really good shots of my target bird, the greater flamingo. Now, there were about 500 or so in this flock. Before I left, I thought it would be cool to take a photo of the flock with the Dubai skyline in the back. So I took a photo, got back that night in my hotel, looked at the photos from the day, and that was my photo of the flock in the skyline. And I said, well, that's terrible. What happened there? I don't normally do too much Lightroom editing with my photos. I like to keep them pretty natural. I do some tweaking, but not a lot. But I thought, where is the skyline? So I saw a button in Lightroom, and it was called dehaze. That hazing is actually the sand in the desert. So I hit that button, and boom, that's what I saw. There's the birds, there's the flamingos, there's the skyline. So that moment was a technology moment, using Lightroom to pull out that skyline. And you can see, I mean, only in Dubai would they build a building twice as tall as every other building in the city. Now, I guess we should get back to the birds.
Kind of, I had a solo moment too. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Was that your solo moment?
Oh dear. There I am with my bestie, one of my birding besties, Pam Ford, and we were at Mullet Hall Equestrian Center, which is now called Johns Island County Park. And look who we ran into in the woods birding. No other than Bill Murray. And he was so funny, and we just shrieked and squealed. We were so excited to see him, and he was very gracious and let us take a picture with him. But that's a memorable moment for me.
We remembered this moment at the last minute this afternoon, and I was thinking maybe we just should have just talked about that for 20 minutes and we wouldn't have had to go through all these slides.
And we looked terrible because it was pouring rain, and we were birding, and we just had so much fun. And remember this.
Bill Murray, loved repetition. So let's get back to the birds. Memorable moment number 3 is moments across the pond.
So for you younger folks that might not know what across the pond mean, it means Europe. And we've never done a designated trip to bird in Europe. I did one whole day once while Ed was working outside of London, which was spectacular with all the parks around the city. But we've just kind of gone and tried to bird as best we could while seeing sights and doing other things. And this was a trip to Greece, which was our first trip to Greece. And it was spectacular to see all these ruins.
What about this?
And that was a view from our hotel. We could see the Parthenon lit up every night. It was just wonderful to be in such a place with such history.
I saw my Google. You asked for a room on the right side of the Hilton Hotel in Athens. This is the view you get. And I was a real hero when I opened the curtains that night of that view. We did a day tour and saw some of the spectacular Greek islands, a few of them. There's a shot of coming back, another sunset. Now, right here below this part of the ruins, I is doing some birding down here, and here's some of the birds that you spotted.
Well, there was a kestrel flying. It was called a common kestrel in Europe. That was really exciting to see. And in the parks, we saw these were common park birds. These are common park birds in most major city parks in Europe. The common chaffinch, the little European robin, which is just about one of the sweetest birds you'd ever see, and then that garish and funny European goldfinch. And we saw these in Prague, we saw them in Warsaw, we saw them in London. They're just like our common birds, but for us, they were so exciting.
And I got another birding pal in Greece, and there's Aija with the birding pal. Okay. And some of the species that you found?
We found this Sardinian warbler. I noticed that in Europe, warblers aren't that terribly colorful. They're kind of plain and black and white and brown. And then the common redshank is kind of like our yellow legs. It was a common marsh bird. And I don't know if I mentioned before, but the Birding Pal is a worldwide website where you can find a guide, either a day guide or a week guide. And that's how we found. We were very lucky. I mean, I make no guarantees about it, but it's a good source for looking for someone for a half day or a day.
So a couple more moments across the pond. Tuscany was mostly about the wine, and there was a bird or two here. This is a view from our villa and the vineyards there. What was that town, Lou? Yeah. Now, we didn't drink all that wine in that barrel. We did see a bird or two. That's a spectacular bee eater. We ran across a world famous butcher and spent an afternoon eating. And what are these birds inside about it?
We were in San Gimignano and just walking around the city and going up in all the towers, and we came upon a church, a 16th century church that had become a museum of taxidermied birds and had been donated to the city. And it had over 350 specimens in there. So what birds I didn't see in Europe live, I really got a pretty good look at this in this little museum. It was just the greatest place.
And the other moment across the pond was in Warsaw?
Yes, and I went with Ed to Warsaw. We were there, I think, for about 12 days. And across from our hotel was this beautiful Leziensky Park. And I would go there and bird every day. And it was funny because I thought the birds were being very aggressive. They kept coming towards my head, and it just really bothered me. And I realized then I saw a lot of elderly people took seed to the park and put it in their hands and held it up. So like this little blue tit, which is kind of like our chickadee, the birds would come and just eat out of your hand. And of course there was a jay, like we have a blue jay. The Eurasian jay is in many European cities, and European green woodpecker. And the fieldfare is kind of like a robin, and these were birds. I would go every day to the park and just spend endless time walking around and looking.
So let's go from across the pond back to South America, and memorable moment number 2 is seeing red. Before we talk about what seeing red was all about, let's set it up. We were in Trinidad at the Aija Nature Center.
And this is a wonderful nature center. And this was our very first birding trip out of the country. Ed had some business in Trinidad, and then we went up into the mountains to stay at this lodge for 5 days, and we did little day trips. And at the lodge, there was in the dining room was a beautiful veranda, and birders would just stay at this veranda all day because there were tables of food. They would put out all kinds of watermelon and pineapple and guava and everything, and the birds would come all day long. It was so colorful and so beautiful that I felt like we almost didn't need to leave the lodge.
So I was in photographer's paradise on this veranda in the morning and then all afternoon. Here's an example. These are honey creepers, green, purple, red-legged. There were even more honey creepers. These are tanagers. We have 2 types of tanagers. These are 4, and I think there were
many more.
Many more, all down in this area here, just taking shots. Interesting bird, the Trinidad motmot. That tail was just fascinating, as were the colors. These were a couple of my favorites. Loved the name, the barred antshrike. Loved how striking the female is and how striking and different the male is. The other thing that struck me is we put this presentation together is pretty good composition, I guess. It's called the rule of threes, where the head is supposed to be right about here with a little room for the bird to be gazing, and a diagonal across a photo as you compose it is very appealing. So somehow that worked for both of those birds.
But our target bird was seeing red.
Seeing red.
So here we are. This is the Scarlet Ibis. And Trinidad is one of the few places where there is this spectacular bird. Venezuela, a little bit of Brazil. But if you know Ibis from Palmetto Lake, an Ibis is a big bird. It's about 24 inches in length and has a 38-inch wingspan. So these birds roost and live in Trinidad, and they come in every evening to roost at Coroni Swamp. And this is protected by the government, so you can only get so close. And we were on a boat, and we got to see these birds coming in for their evening roost.
We were pretty far away from them because the birds are protected. But as they all came into roost, a memorable moment with this spectacular bird was this one. Imagine if this is what we were seeing at Palmetto Lake with all of the ibis roosting, etc. I mean, it was like ornaments on a tree with these beautiful, beautiful red birds in the green foliage.
And they get their color from a lot of it from their diet, eating crustaceans, shrimp and shellfish that give them that bright red color. But to see it, I mean, it was like it wasn't a real bird when it was flying over us. It was just amazing. It wasn't a cardinal. It was giant and red.
So if you're keeping score, we're on memorable moment number 1. And this one is about the rock star. Once again, let's set it up. It's about hummingbirds. These are U.S. hummingbirds that we've seen in photographs.
And east of the Mississippi, we have one hummingbird, and that is the ruby-throated hummingbird on the right there. And that's what we see at our feeders here in South Carolina and Georgia. And there are 16 total U.S. hummers, and we've seen 14 of them. And I think photographed quite a few, 14 of them, yeah. So that's a lot of fun in Arizona, California, Texas, to see all those hummingbirds.
This ruby-throated, if you remember, some of you might remember back in, I think, 2018, Patrick McMillan spoke at our Seabrook Island Birder evening program about the hummingbirds. And this photo was taken in the South Carolina Botanical Garden right outside of his office where those videos were shot. Now, occasionally, as some of us know, we get a rarity. We get some of these Western hummingbirds here in the East. And we had one in Georgia just last week.
Just last week, a lady had a hummingbird in her garden that she didn't recognize. Hummingbirds are gone, but he was working her flowers, and she called a birder to come over, and it was a rare Rufus hummingbird, which was in Georgia. And it was so exciting to find.
We had only seen that once in Rufus. So back to the rock star. Back to Trinidad. Well, in Trinidad, we saw another 8 spectacular hummingbirds, all different. Some of those we saw from the veranda. Others, one of our trips that we took in an afternoon was to a retired professor's home, and he had created a habitat for hummingbirds in his backyard and had become an expert on the species. How many feeders did
He
he have?
had 24 feeders. It was like gnats. It was like you didn't know where to look. And if you had walked into that yard, they would have been buzzing your head.
So you can imagine how thrilled we are when we see our ruby-throated at our feeder. Here's a shot of the white-chested emerald, the ruby topaz, the black-throated mango, all at the feeder at once, and there were even more. Another thing we learned from this gentleman that afternoon about hummingbirds is hummingbirds love the rain. And we went back to Asa Wright that afternoon and had a tropical rainstorm. And right below us on the veranda was this white-necked Jacobin in the rain. And that is one of my favorite photos ever, with its color, with that really nice hazy background, the white-necked Jacobin.
And I don't even know how he was able to fly. It was raining so hard and he just seemed so in his element and comfortable in this driving rainstorm.
Okay, so get to the punchline. We still haven't talked about the rock star. So this is the veranda. Aija every morning before breakfast would go look for birds. I'd shoot photos. I'd also early in the morning before breakfast go behind the stand of trees, and I was looking for a particular hummingbird that was very hard to see. So I went down there the first morning and I got a little intimidated. There was a young man from Austria that was a professional photographer. He had a giant lens. He had all of his lights set up to go off wirelessly when he took the shot. I'm a little intimidated, but we're both looking and looking and looking. And we see the female flying around, the tufted coquette female, no male.
And this hummingbird is about 2.5 to 3 inches large. It can be mistaken for a large insect in flight. It's
So
just one of the
it's just
tiniest
a little
ones.
guy. Second morning, same thing. Guy from Austria, Ed, lots of gear, sort of good gear. Same thing, female flying around. Okay. Third morning, I head down there. This is the day we're leaving. There's a third photographer there now. There's a lady with an iPhone. Okay. We look and look and look, and all of a sudden, and I don't remember which of the three of us spotted us, but we looked up right above us. Are you ready for it? Boom, the male tufted coquette.
And he is just absolutely stunning. He has this bushy orange crest and then these long shoulder plumes that are tipped in black that look like just polka dots kind of floating over his side. And he just gave us the most wonderful look. And he's a target for many people that go to Trinidad. He's just a wonderful bird.
So we did say that the moment not in any priority order. I'd like to say the one we closed with was maybe the most memorable moment for me, at least from a photography point of view, and the experience of finding this exceptional bird. So that's our story, our top 10 birding moments. Now, I know we took a little liberty because there were a lot of moments within the 10 moments, but we probably could have talked for another 3 hours. So we'll close on Aija.
So we usually end our day having a glass of wine somewhere, reliving our day. There we are. And I think this was taken in Bath, Maine. And there's my binoculars and my glass of wine. And we're talking about our successes and our failures of the day or whatever. And it just, what a fun time we've had.
So what's your favorite moment having a glass of wine?
Favorite glass of wine? I think mine was the day after the pelagic, that we were so relieved to be on dry land and that we had survived the dreadful seas, that we were so excited in Monterey, California to have a glass of wine.
Mine was in the most spectacular national parks we've ever seen, having a glass of wine, plotting the next day on
A Black Canyon of the Gunnison.
So with that, we just like to say, here's to you. Thank you very much for listening to us tonight, and everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
And I would like to share some questions and just remind the rest of our audience, if you do have a question, find the chat, type it up. But our first question comes from Carl Miller, going way back to the greater prairies, but even bigger than that. His question is, Ed, did you shoot any video of the greater Prairie Chickens? And do you shoot any video at all? And now he's suggesting you should be shooting some video.
So the answer is no, no, and I'll consider it. So a good point, Carl. Those would have been some spectacular videos of that bird in action fighting. You're absolutely right. Good point.
You need to have two cameras at the same time, one doing the
Yes.
stills and one doing the video.
Yes, yes, that's right. Good
All right, the
question.
next question is from Judy Moore, and she wants to know, how do you take such clear pictures while in a bus, a car, etc.? You're moving a lot, or the subjects are moving. How are you taking these so clear?
Well, I've got some things that I've learned how to do just from going to classes and things like that. They just work for me. Some settings that I use to make sure that I'm focusing and locked in on the bird. And if I'm able to lock in on the bird's head, I don't have to worry about what's called shutter speed or the motion. The camera does that work for me. And just through the years, I mean, that's a pretty heavy camera. It weighs 8 pounds with the lens, but you get good at panning, it's called, locking in on a bird and following it, whether you're in a moving car or watching a bird fly on North Beach. So it just comes with time and practice. But the secret is lock in on the head and just try to stay there and follow it. That's the simple advice.
So as a follow-up, Maureen Healy, I think you kind of answered the question, but her direct question is, what focal length lens do you use for these great photos?
That's a good question. And again, I learned this from going to some classes years ago when we first got started in this hobby from professional photographers. I don't know if this is the way, but it works for me. I shoot on what's called aperture priority. It's the A on the dial. What that means is you set the aperture, the lens opening, and I set it to wide open to let the most amount of light in the camera. Aperture priority, then with that, the camera takes care of the shutter speed for you. You don't worry about that. So frankly, it's a no-brainer. I don't have to think about too much when I'm shooting. I don't want to be thinking about settings, manual settings, all that stuff. I just want to find the bird with help from Aija, of course, and look for some interesting behavior. So that's my setting, aperture priority. I set it down to, I can stop it down to f6, and I'll tweak the ISO depending on the light. So that's my standard setting, and it works all the time. Doesn't work all the
Great,
time.
thank you.
Doesn't work all the time, but it works a lot.
Did you get the shot? Oh, you didn't?
Yeah,
Oh.
that's Aija. Yeah. Did you get the shot? Did you get the shot? What happened? Why didn't you get the shot?
Well, here's one that Carl's asking, and I'm thinking you might want to answer this if you know the answer, is, do you know how many of the birds in Trinidad are migratory?
Ooh, no, I don't know that. I don't know that. I'd have to look that up. Sorry, Carl.
What's interesting about that, not knowing the detail of that, Carl, is we didn't see any birds that were our birds. They were all unique tropical birds. So I don't know where the migration would be in South America. Where exactly do they go? Because we didn't see any warblers
Like
down there.
the tanagers, well, it might not be, I forget what time of the year it was. Yeah, we were there at an odd, we weren't there at a peak time of the year. So that would be hard to say. We just happened to be there, but
So
I'd
that
have to check that out.
Maybe the answer.
And sadly, Asa Wright, which is so famous for so many years, has closed. They closed for COVID, and now I read that the lodge is not even going to reopen. And it's such a historic place and such a great place.
That's sad. Another camera question, but then we have a few more questions, so don't worry, they're not all camera questions, but
That's okay.
which, Carl is asking again, which camera and lens combination, Ed, are you using these days to shoot?
Yeah, I have to be careful how much money you spend on this. So I use a Nikon 7500. It's the top end of the amateur line, and it has all the bells and whistles that I could ever figure out how to use. And I have a Tamron 600 millimeter lens, 150 to 600. I have a second camera that's a Nikon 7100, an older body, and I have a Tamron 18 millimeter to 400 that I use for travel shots, landscape shots, grandchildren shots, and I can go to 400 if I need to. So I have 2 cameras that I carry. And they
Aija?
work really well.
Yes.
So David wants to know, Mom, what's your favorite bird?
Oh, don't ask me.
I'm thinking your son should know your favorite bird already,
No,
but
people ask me that all the time, and I cannot tell you what my favorite bird is. Honestly, I just like so many things, and I don't have a favorite. I'm so sorry, David. I can't think of my favorite bird.
well, that's why he doesn't know.
That's right.
It's the one.
I don't know
It's
either.
the one from
It's
your
the one
mother.
I still need.
It's the one from your Mother's Day.
Oh, well, we're
card.
getting to that question, but there's a couple more questions before that.
Yeah.
So Mary Wild, it says wonderful photo tour, but wants to know where you're going next.
Oh, yeah.
Well, sadly, with COVID, we haven't flown anywhere since the March of whatever February before COVID. So I don't know where we've been really working on the U.S. the Lewis and Clark's 2018 and 2019. We really worked on the U.S. and we'd like to get back to flying, but we're still not totally confident going off. So I don't know.
2 places we talk about when we can. I'd like to go to Hawaii to get the 50th state, and I've never been to Hawaii. Aija has. Aija is Latvian. Aija Janzems is her name. Her family fled from Latvia. And we were talking seriously about a trip to Latvia to see the country, which we've never been, and the bird.
It's a great bird.
Maybe that's
They're
another
migratory birds.
place we'd like to go to.
That's cool. Leslie Gore says, amazing presentation. Thank you. And do you have a bird that you're still in the hunt for? Do you have one that has just escaped you?
Oh, yes, and it's escaping my mind, unfortunately, too. But there is something that we've dipped on several times. We call it dip when you don't get a bird. I have a kind of a list I just keep going about west of still birds I need out west. I'm trying to think, what was it that we no, I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'll think of it in a moment. That we've tried for several times. We're excited to try to see that bar-tailed godwit, maybe that would be a life bird, but in the east we have pretty much everything other than vagrants in Florida that are come in, but most of our work is west of the Mississippi.
A couple more people thanking you, wondering, loving the presentation. Is there anyone else out there who has one more question?
I had a question. I can't figure out how to send it.
Okay, Marcia, what's your question?
Just ask it, Marcia.
I want to know if all those Conrads in this thing belong to you.
Of course,
Yes,
yeah, we
they
loaded
do.
up the attendants. There they are. There's Karen and Oliver. Yeah, there they are.
They're
That's the
your kid
family.
and that's your brother? What?
No, a son David, daughter Karen, their children, their spouses, granddaughter Lucy in college in Boston. Maybe Rosemary's here, not sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. One quick thing I didn't mention, I forgot it on the slide, just a little trivia. Maybe the kids would appreciate this. I forgot to say it. I wondered today how many edited photos I have. And you can just look in the file I have since 2009 of all the trips. They're pretty well organized. And just search on JPG files. I have 16,000 edited bird pictures. I forgot to mention
Told us that already, Mr. Ed.
16,000. I asked Gaia how many she thought I had. She said 1,000. 16,000. So, grandkids, I probably have another 16,000 photos of you guys as well. So that number staggered me today when I saw them.
Well, Ed and I, again, you've done a marvelous job in sharing
Thank
your
you.
knowledge and your photos and your travels, especially for those of us who haven't gone very far from our neighborhoods. So it's been enjoyable. Thank you all for joining tonight's program. It has been recorded and will be available in the next couple of days if you need to rewatch or you have friends who you'd like to share it with. So let me just make sure. I see one more chat thing came in. Let me make sure it's not a question. Looks like another thank you. So I will thank you. I'll stop the recording and say good night to everybody.
Good. I wonder if could our family stay on the Zoom a little